A listed company has to take into account that certain financing transactions may require that it obtain shareholder approval. Companies that are listed on the NASDAQ should reference Rule 5635, and companies that are listed on the NYSE should reference Rule 312. In the case of certain private placement transactions undertaken by an issuer, where the private placement will result in an offering of 20% or more of the issuer's pre-transaction total shares outstanding, where the transaction is completed at a price below book or market and would be considered to be dilutive, the listed company is required to obtain shareholder approval. Oftentimes, this comes into play in the case of PIPE transactions for listed companies, where the issuer is going to be selling the securities in a private placement transaction and the securities may be sold at a discount. A company can factor in the requirement to obtain shareholder approval into the timing of the transaction, or can structure the transaction such that it results in the issuance of under 20% of the pre-transaction total shares outstanding, or restructure the transaction so that it's completed at market. In addition to focusing on private placement transactions that may be completed at a discount, the stock exchange rules also require a shareholder approval in the context of a transaction that results in a change of control. Neither NASDAQ nor the NYSE American has actually formally defined what constitutes a change of control. However, it's presumed that one should look at any transaction that's going to result in a purchase by a single holder of 20% or 30% of the issuer's outstanding voting stock, and then consider the specific facts and circumstances, such as, for example, whether there are other significant holders of the company's common stock, whether the new holder has any board rights or observer rights or other ways to influence the company's day-to-day management. In addition, in the case of NASDAQ issuers, a NASDAQ issuer has to keep in mind that in the case of an acquisition that's going to result in the issuance of more than 20% of the pre-transaction total shares outstanding, NASDAQ is going to require a shareholder vote regardless of the price at which the securities are issued. NASDAQ is going to apply a number of facts in order to determine whether the proposed offering is completed in connection with an acquisition transaction. So it's going to look at the proximity of the financing, the timing of board approvals, the stated use of proceeds, among other things. In addition to considering all of these transactions, it's important to remember that not all SEC-registered public offerings are considered to be public offerings for stock exchange purposes. Certain transactions, like registered direct transactions, which are undertaken on an agency basis and are marketed to a relatively small number of investors, may be considered a private placement for purposes of the stock exchange rules and may require stockholder approval to be received in advance of the transaction, to the extent that it's going to result in the issuance of more than 20% of the pre-transaction total shares outstanding. In the case of Rule 144A offerings, the NYSE has a very helpful bona fide private placement exemption that can be used in order to avoid having to seek shareholder approval. Now, finally, it's important to consider that transactions that occur in close proximity to one another may be aggregated for purposes of calculating the 20%.